Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final class together for Advanced Exercise Physiology, Kinesiology 416. Yay! Uh, I was never a good cheerleader, never. Maybe it's a yay, maybe it's a yay, hopefully, because you're moving on to the next thing, whatever that might be. Those of you that are seniors, this is one of a few classes, not the only class that you have to getting you to that step to graduation and then the next thing for you. A few of you being juniors or maybe another semester left. Hopefully, God willing, next semester in the fall, everything goes as planned. We're back in class as at least somewhat per normal. I wouldn't be surprised if we're looking at some small changes into how we do things, still only a few months out and unlikely to be having a vaccine for COVID-19 as of yet. That said, we'll see how that goes. I'm expecting normal things to an extent, at least getting back to our normal way of doing things with being live and in class. I'm a teacher or professor that really prefers to have face-to-face interactions. I want to be able to see your face to know if you're getting the information, if you're distant, if you're bothered, if something is concerning you, so I can actually address it as a group if it's widely dispersed, or if it's just one person I can talk to individually. Unfortunately, I can't do that. Or haven't been able to do that the last few weeks. And you haven't been able to ask me questions directly one-on-one, face-to-face, and that creates some challenges too. Again, don't hesitate to do that in the future. Once in a while, for all the years that I've been a teacher, not necessarily at a university, but a teacher for vocational education, adult education, as well as high school, junior high, and every level. Once in a while, I get someone that pops up somewhere and asks a question about something they learned back when we went over the information, when they took a course or courses from me. And I always think that's fantastic, whether it's because you're just curious or because it's of particular value to you based upon your job, whatever it might be, or the way just for exercise. I highly encourage you to do it. My expectation is, and I won't be bothered, you won't do it. Maybe not necessarily because you don't care, it's just that you go on to other things, and it happens for all of us. We often think about how I should call so-and-so, and we just don't do it. Right? Just know that I would love to hear from you down the road, whether you're still on campus and so am I, and you drop by and say hello, or to have a conversation, have a debate, whatever you want to do. Okay? I want to be there for you to help you out any way that I can. That is my job. I truly feel that's the way that I'm supposed to be doing what I do. That being said, I want you to succeed wherever you go next, wherever that might be. So let's talk about our last chapter. We're going to talk about exercise and activity, or the text refers to it for chapter 10, the Irvine text, as exercise and physical activity for health and fitness. It's interesting because we've kind of been talking about some of that all along and how the lines are really understandably blurred between performance as a whole, or whether it's life performance versus athletic performance, although there are standards and expectations that must be met before you move through each level and move to higher expectations for what you do with exercise. But there's a lot of things that is very similar. It's more independent to the person we're talking about training, or the small group that we're training or group that we're training, as opposed to making grandiose statements that are absolutely true for everyone. The ranges we talk about have a lot of probably at least have that 98% bell curve recognition. Everybody in that category fits into the general, pretty darn close to the numbers we talk about from a general perspective. There's absolutely the outliers, the 1% of the people who basically have major challenges, major issues that go beyond anything we've seen before, that change how we do things. And there's also the 1% on the elite side, or less than 1%, however you want to think about it, that just seem to defy all norms. There's always going to be those people, but the majority of people are going to fit in that bell curve. There's no question about it. But we want to find out when we work with them in the first place. So let's talk about exercise and physical activity, our final time together here for a lecture video, right? And for our Concordia class for Advanced XFITs. All right, a couple things to kind of talk about briefly, some stuff we talked about, information we went over from our last lecture video, and things we've been talking about all along, really. How about a general question of how do we start an exercise program? How do we progress? We're going to be talking about that. We have been talking about that. We're going to talk about that a little more specifically in our final talk here, our final lecture video here. That said, how do we start an exercise program? We start by starting. Let's make this really simple. We start by starting. At the end of your chapter 10 text actually talks about contemplation or pre-contemplation. Should I do this? Contemplation, let's really seriously think about this. And then essentially preparation, okay, what should I be doing specifically, action, actually doing the exercise, and then maintenance. And that's fine. Like so many things, there's nothing that, from a standpoint of the predominant information we've covered in our textbook, that's wrong by any stretch of the imagination. The question is, like so much information that we tend to go over throughout life, not just in our course here, there's always like, well, we need further clarification, further ideas we're talking about with an individual that we're training. And that being said, we have to take into account everything going on with a particular person, their lifestyle behaviors, their sleep, their nutrition, and their exercise, and knowing what's going on with them. With our lifestyle, we also mean their health risk, right? And then we determine how we start. What you've been doing. We talk about their training age. What have you been doing in your past, from a standpoint of past experience, and then your current training age, from a standpoint of your recent experience. So maybe you're a former athlete, but you haven't worked out for years. So we're treating you like a beginner. And if you perform really well, then we'll adjust accordingly. But we still treat you like a beginner. Anybody who hasn't trained for many, many months should act like a beginner day one. And then we adjust quickly upward. One of the best things I ever heard a coach or a trainer say, a gentleman named Fred Hatfield, who basically was the head of the International Sports Sciences Association. I think he still might be an organization that helps certify trainers and work with fitness professionals and whatnot. He at one point broke the world record for doing a squat over 1,000 pounds. And of course, that's been shattered by a lot since that time, back in the 70s, I think, when he broke that, or 80s when he broke that. That being said, one of the things he said I thought was fantastic, when he had a very well trained athlete named Evander Holyfield, who by many people's accounts in the last several decades is, for his size, probably the fittest, most athletic, well-conditioned fighter, from a standpoint of boxing, at least anyway, that we've seen. Maybe as in the history of all boxing, from a standpoint of just for that size, and his speed and his conditioning and his endurance is phenomenal. Phenomenal. That said, he came to Frederick Hatfield, and Hatfield related this story. He said he came to him and he asked everybody in our group, and I was one of the people in the group when he asked this question, and he said, where do you think I started Evander Holyfield? You know, Evander Holyfield at this point in time is the #1 contender for the heavyweight boxing championship. Okay, Tyson was #1. Okay, at that time, and he came to Hatfield to basically see what he could do for him. And he said, where do you think I started Evander Holyfield? I started like a level 1 type person, where we start with like basic type work. I start like level 2 with like strength endurance type work, a little more challenging. Did I start with like level 2 or 3 where I in more hypertrophy? Maybe start to bring some interval type training in. Did I start with level 4 where I train him like an elite athlete, and we're training in the elite levels of training? And of course, large majority of us talked about either 3 or 4. 3 for being conservative and 4 for being, come on, he's an elite athlete. And he said, and I'll never forget it, he said, nope, day 1. This is day 1 with Evander Holyfield. I know Evander Holyfield, or 99.9% certain that Evander Holyfield is not going to behave like most human beings in terms of their adaptation to stress, their ability to handle stress. That being said, he is now, for the first time in front of me, here we are, I'm going to give him some basic stuff. However, with the expectation, full expectation, that he's able to adapt very quickly to that basic information, that basic exercise, and quickly we advance him far faster than most human beings. I thought that was fantastic. You still start day 1, no matter who we're talking about. You run a lot? Great. Let me see a walk. You lift how much? 50 pounds over your head? Here's a 15-pound weight. That seems like, really? You're going to do that to people? Oh, I do that all the time. Whatever they say, I drop them in half or more, and I say, no problem. Show me you can do this well, and I'll advance you quickly. No one's ever argued with that. No one I've ever worked with as a coach or a trainer or a teacher, when they said something about exercise that they were capable of, and I quickly gave them something that was less than 50% what they said they're capable of doing, and then they argued with me briefly, and then I said, no problem, just show me you can do this and I'll advance you. They don't question that, though. They're in a hurry to show you they can do it. Then when they can't, they are a little humbled, and they quickly realize, and I quickly say to them, don't worry, that's okay. It's just because we're taking a closer focus at these things that we do. It doesn't mean you're not strong or not capable, not high performing. Let's just move slowly through this, and things go pretty well from there. Okay, just a suggestion, just a thought from a generalization here. We'll talk more about that and how we progress. What do we do with instances of increased health risk or presence of disease? Kind of like we just talked about. We need to know more about their specific risks, their specific disease, possibly having a medical checkup or medical clearance from a doctor to know more about what's going on, what they're ready for, and knowing that ideally we want exercise to help them. And of course, at certain phases of someone's dealing with illness or dealing with health challenges, they may not be ready to exercise. We talked before about the idea if someone's got fever, whether temperature is high, you got 101, 102, or even 100 degree temperature, your temperature is up. Exercise is going to raise your temperature. Why would you want someone to have who has a fever to be engaging in exercise? You have nausea and significant dizziness. If we start exercising, like right now, you sit up and you're lightheaded and you start swirling. You think adding exercise in this moment is going to be a good idea? So we have to take into account current symptoms as we speak and how someone's responding to those symptoms, as well as the sum total of what's happening with their illness or their health risks, right? Treat them like an individual. And there's a lot of things that the book gave some really good ideas and talked about some general things to be thinking about. We'll talk about some of those. There's too much to be talked about in any period of time. If you love information, you realize it's a love-hate relationship, that the more you do it, the more you learn, sure, but the more you learn, the more you have more questions. The more questions you have, the more you feel like you know less. Right? Welcome to learning, right, and growing. That said, so how do we create lifelong health and performance? One day at a time. One day at a time. This lecture video is one little microcosm of information. Everything we do is always that way. The more we can actually focus on where we are at the moment with our exercise, what needs to be done today, not what we think we should be doing. Oh, I do that all the time. I think about the fact that I'm 49 years old and I know that my VO2 max was about, I didn't know exactly. I didn't do it an actual lab test. It was based upon how far I could go in 12 minutes. And my VO2 max was about a 74. 73, 74. It was rather high, right? That being said, right now, if I get well rested and get out there and try to run, I might be able to make it a 50 VO2 max by being able to run, not as much as 2 laps, 2 miles around a track in 12 minutes. No, but within a couple, maybe within 400, 500 meters or so of that, give or take. I'd like to think that I can. I don't know for sure. That said, that's a big drop. 74 to 49, 50, somewhere in there. That's a 33% drop in VO2 max. And if I think about what I could do years ago, where I was, and that's how I train, then I'm going to be facing a lot of probable injuries, health problems, and frustration, and psychological stress, emotional stress for how hard I'm pushing myself, and I just can't do that quite that level again. I think it's pretty fair to say, without knowing anything for certain, that I'm not going to get a 74, 75 VO2 max again, no matter what I do at this point. I'd like to think that I could, but I don't know. There's something to be said for let's try. You are now a 49 whatever VO2 max and you want to get close to 74. Let's see how we do. And to me, that's the best way of looking at that. Day to day, how are you doing today? Let's adjust based on your RPE, how you're feeling, what's your heart rate today, what's our expectation for force output, what's our expectation for what speed we're going to be moving, what load we're going to be lifting, what's our goal, okay? And then what actually happens, we adjust. It's not an absolute. You better get back on that line and run this speed. If you can't, you can't. You as a coach will always have to determine the difference between someone's efforts versus actual performance. There's always that. But for the most part, most people, it's either there or it's not. And you can usually see it in form, when form breaks down, right? That being said, some good generalities for us. So let's talk a little more about exercise and physical activity. From a standpoint of disease, the primary prevention of disease refers to use of a strategy or a treatment to prevent the first occurrence of it ever happening in the first place. You don't have cancer and you never had cancer. Let's prevent that. Let's have primary prevention purpose here in how we exercise, how we eat, how we sleep, how we take care of ourselves lifestyle wise, and hopefully we don't have any issues. Secondary prevention. You've had an issue before. You've gotten through cancer. You have had a previous heart attack, you are diabetic or have been diabetic and you're not showing symptoms lately because you've had good behaviors. So we're trying to avoid it coming back. Any of those kinds of things, that's more of a secondary prevention, trying to prevent a second event of a particular disease or significant illness. And exercise is a viable strategy in most cases for both. The exception is when someone's excessively fatigued or having some excessively challenging physiological challenge right now, we can't be asking them to exercise. We talked a lot about that 40 to 60% VO2 max, that moderate range, and it could be as little as low as 30 to 40%, meaning pretty much in the low range, nowhere near you, meaning anywhere near your lactate threshold, which for most people is 40, 50% of their VO2 max, that's their lactate threshold, right? That's the maximal of their stroke volume, pretty consistent stroke volume and lactate threshold, relatively similar for most people. That said, that's starting from nowhere, right? And of course, that will change over time. But when they're starting really low, we start them really low. When we talk, your book will actually talk about high intensity exercise, and I see it all the time, and it really makes me nervous. Whenever people start talking about high intensity exercise, I want to hear more what they have to say before they engage it. I've seen it with me, and I think I've related the story a little bit with you, that when I moved down to Southern California, I wanted to be an Olympic athlete. I wanted to be an 800-meter runner and train for the Sydney Olympics back in 2000. Didn't make that. I ran myself into the ground very quickly. I never got even near the trials. My times were nowhere near reasonable enough. They were reasonable to be making state finals in high school, but they were not reasonable to be making Olympic trial invites, let alone an Olympic trial win, and then moving on to the Olympics and winning the Olympics. Different level, every level, significant level jump, right? That being said, that big goal forced me into overtraining and utilizing too much high intensity training too often. Frequency was too much. The intensity was not necessarily too much. The volume of training with the intensity was too much. I was trying to meet standards that were set up for people who already were 800-meter elite athletes. I was trying to be one. I had once been elite high school, right? I've talked about this before, I'm pretty sure, but we got to make sure we're clear about where we are, not just where we want to be. They are not the same thing, right? Now, your book refers to physical activity as to any kind of movement. So you're being physical active. Right now, I'm moving my hands a little bit. There's some activity there, right? Total daily activity is a sum of your sleep, your sedentary behavior, and all types of physical activity in a given day. It includes our exercise and what we do just from generally moving around, right? And why I refer to being active or exercising? Someone being active, they just move around a lot, do work around the house. So they go, I exercise all the time. That's so commonly said. You exercise all the time? What do you mean? Well, I move around the house. I move. Like, that's not the same thing. I go for walks. You go for walks. Do you walk your dog and you stop for the dog to go sniff a bush or to pee on the ground or go bark at somebody or go see somebody else every few hundred feet? That's not a walk. A walk, when it comes to exercise, you just keep walking. You keep walking for the expectation of 20 to 60 minutes or more, right? There's a big difference. We got to make sure we understand that when people talk about what they do on a regular basis. But exercise has a specific goal. It's a specific goal of improving health or physical fitness with a plan and a structure to be repeated. I like to call it a training session. I don't like to refer to exercise as just exercise or a workout. I much prefer it as a training session because it implies there's a plan. It implies there's a purpose. It implies there's something more we're focusing on, both short and long term, not just going to go do some stuff right now. Because when you do a workout, you're only thinking about just doing something today. And rarely do you have an actual overall plan in place, or are you thinking about the implications of what you have done in the past several weeks, let alone the next several weeks or days to come. Okay? I call it a training session. I suggest considering such a thing. Maximal strength, speed, power parameters have greater performance implications, whereas cardiovascular fitness has broader implications for endurance, performance, and health. There's no question about it. There are some who criticize the fact that there's a lot of research in the past on cardiovascular training and not enough on strength training, and there's more of it now, and with high intensity interval training and whatnot, and so there needs to be more research there. I don't disagree with that, but don't negate the cardiovascular benefit. Likewise, don't say cardiovascular benefit is all you need. That's not true either. But you got to be really careful about jumping ship and deciding that people need to be doing cardiovascular training independently. You just do strength training and some high intensity intervals, and it's going to solve all. It's not that simple, and there are a lot of things you're not going to get benefit from if that's the way you pursue things. And the research studies we typically look at are only over a few weeks. They don't have broader implications for longer period. The obvious should be there. Short term, more cardiovascular focus. From a standpoint of the beginning, light strength, get more intense, more maximal strength, more high intensity interval training over time, not in the beginning at all. But some studies start that way, and I never understood that. Sedentary behavior implies a lack of any reasonable physical activity. It's believed to account for about 7% of all deaths from coronary heart disease, 8% from diabetes, and 12% from breast cancer, just the mere fact of being sedentary. That's, that's a lot. That seems like maybe small amounts, but it's still significant numbers. That's a lot of people just because they're sedentary. Got to use our bodies, right? We know that by this point, everything we've covered. The cost of medical care and lower economic productivity. You're missing work, you're tired and worn down, so you can't work very effectively. You don't feel good. When you don't feel good, you don't perform well. All those things play a role with being sedentary and being fatigued and worn down. And that costs hundreds of billions of dollars annually in both lost productivity and medical costs. Not a good thing, right? Self-reported behaviors, self-reported. These numbers are really low because these are self-reported. Can you imagine if actually we followed through on this and actually found actual information? Because I bet the numbers are lower than this. Self-reported behaviors meeting the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services guidelines, USDHHS, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The guidelines of that 150-75, at least 150 minutes of moderate exercise per week, or 75 minutes of vigorous activity minimally. This is minimum, right? Let alone the goal we're trying to move toward for the average person. The average person, trying to get them toward 300 minutes or more of moderate exercise and 150 minutes or more of the vigorous exercise, right? And the numbers were in the states for the US were lowest in Tennessee, reported at 12% people who met those standards. Can you imagine what the actual numbers would be if it wasn't just self-reported, if we actually followed up on them and took a look at what they're really doing and watched them every day? And the highest was in Colorado at 27%. Colorado, Hawaii, Oregon, and like the Northwest and California tend to be the highest in general, and then Colorado kind of Northwest, right? Utah, all those states tend to be the most active in general. That being said, that doesn't necessarily mean that someone's going to be more fit or more healthy because they live in one of those states, but it does seem like there's more opportunities and more probability, mostly because of outdoor opportunities and less significant closeness of populations, right? That said, about 32% of all 18 to 24-year-olds basically had reported behaviors of meeting those guidelines. 18 to 24-year-olds, only 32%, and about 16% when they're much, much older. And again, these are self-reported, so I'm expecting them even lower. Women at 70% exercising less on average than men do at 25%. Okay, pretty. If you ask me as a professor, as a person who loves exercise, who feels it's vital for everyone, I see these numbers, that's a bit depressing. And I think a lot of it has to not just do with the fact that people don't know what they should do, they have to find something they enjoy and are willing to do. And I talked a little about that in our last lecture video. It doesn't mean we fully give in to them. I had a client one time years ago, almost 20 years ago, who wanted to play basketball. The guy was 100 pounds overweight, and he wanted to play basketball with me for an hour. He would have paid me basically what was at the time $75 an hour to just play basketball with him. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I'm not willing to cave on what I feel is vital for his welfare and well-being by just simply giving him just what he wants. Don't get me wrong, I gave him a few minutes of basketball as long as he was doing everything else. We'd finish with a little bit of basketball at the end, or I'd do a little bit at the beginning and say, I'm going to give you a little something here, and you're going to then follow up and do all the work I want you to do. It's like I used to do when I taught wood shop years ago, more than 25 years, almost 25 years ago, now with junior high. I was amazed when I promised my students Jolly Ranchers. They would sweep the entire woodshop floor. They would dust off all the tables. The room would be spotless in less than 5 minutes with all 15, 20 students all clean everything up for a couple Jolly Ranchers each. That's fantastic. A little reward goes a long way, but we have to understand that reward is for the short-term recognition of a need to do something or to get someone to do something. We don't just give everybody what they want only. Little something they want to do the stuff they'll need, okay? And everybody needs to be walking at least, if not jogging or running if they can, but definitely minimally walking. That said, the relative risk of dying. Mortality rates often talk about over the next few years. The chart in your text referred to in the next 8 years, they talk about mortality rates. Can be reduced substantially with meeting minimum standards of weekly exercise, meeting those 150, 75, or the 300, 150, preferably the 150 over 75, really. The cardiovascular mortality can be dropped by about 45%. That's amazing, right? About almost half. And diabetes by about half. And all causes by 33%, cancer by about 20%. Cancer is a tough one because there's so many varieties of cancer too. That's the big thing. So many different levels, so many different varieties, so many different ages when people get cancer. That one would take in particular. You probably say the same about every one of these stats here. Let's break it down to what age you're talking about within those categories. What level were they at? What did they get to? Did they have a serious heart attack or had a minor heart attack? Did they have a little bit of damage to the heart, a lot of damage to the heart? There's a lot of varieties here, but still those numbers are staggering how significant involving regular, simple exercise can be. Consider tapering as you age. I like that idea. I taper, meaning I've been on a lifelong taper at this point. I don't try to go out there and do 10 400s or anything like that. That's just insane. Why? Why? Really, why? It might become a fun thing to do one time, see if I can actually do it. Right now, it'd be a bad idea. Not just because people aren't supposed to be going out about hanging around groups, because I think I'd hurt myself trying to run 10 400s at any reasonable speed anyway. I wouldn't even make it to the 10th one, regardless of how much rest I had between 400-meter intervals at this point. That being said, overtraining is a greater concern with age, and the book brings it up, and a lot of people do bring it up. They say, what about the probability that people who've died from too much stress, and exercise is stress? That is true, and that is both of that. All that information is true. People could die from too much exercise. That is true. It's also pretty unusual, and it wasn't necessarily in this course. It was in the 406 saying exercise phys. I was a marathon runner named Ryan Shea, who basically was expected to be the next coming of like the best marathoner in the world. Very young, in his 20s, and I think it was by the time when he died, he was in his late 20s. I don't think it was early 30s. It was late 20s, and he was one of the best in the world. And he 10K, 6 miles into a marathon, he had a heart attack and died. And they thought, how could this be? This guy is in incredible cardiovascular shape. I suspect, and nothing can prove it, but everything that I've seen over my years and training me and training many people over the years and doing a lot of research, I suspect overtraining was a greater issue. Did he have possibly a genetic predisposition towards something that no one saw until he engaged in significant enough stress to trigger something? Oh, for sure, for sure. I think that's a pretty good probability anyway. But that being said, overtraining is the biggest part. Marathon runners and endurance athletes are known for engaging in ridiculous levels of volume of work. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it works out just fine. And other times it puts them at great risk. The thing about what top athletes do, you don't want to emulate it. You don't want to emulate it, period. Don't. Okay? Anyone's current program, we don't emulate it exactly. We make adjustments based on our own abilities. I always get a kick out of hearing some athletes trying to do someone else's. Some other athletes work out and they get their rear end kicked and get worn out because it's not the same. You don't train the same way. If you train that way on a regular basis, it'll be a piece of cake for you too. If you're close in proximity to certain athletic abilities, but why would you want to train like that? First of all, we need to understand that top tier athletes and elite performers are willing to risk their lives for their performance. There was a great study that was done with the 1996 Atlanta Games, and they asked 300 different athletes the same question. If you would be willing to get a gold medal, there'd be a 50% chance you'd die. We'd do a coin flip right here. Here's your gold medal, and we're going to do a coin flip. And if it's heads, or heads or tails, you die, one you live. Okay, you want it? Here's your gold medal. Do you want to do it? 300 for 300 said yes, they would do so. Why would you ever follow someone like that? They're crazy. And I get it. It's what they've been focusing on all their lives. When you get singularly focused on something, it becomes more important than anything else. That's true of anything, isn't it? And we have to look at exercise from a standpoint of our well-being, not just our performance. We need both. For that reason, we need to take a more conservative approach, not be so broad-based like that, or so specifically, okay, you bet it, I'm in, boom. I don't think that's a good idea. Don't have to probably explain that, I don't think, I hope not. But don't confuse the parameters of adding intensity to people when they get older or increasing volume gradually, sure. But we don't want to overdo it for sure. But that's why we take RPE and heart rate and force output into account. If we do it every single day on a regular basis, we record data and we make sure we're clearly aware of what our typical heart rate is and how we typically feel in a similar situation, and force output changes over time and from one day to the next, let alone progression over time, it's not going to be a problem with overtraining. But we have to track it, we have to plan it. Cardiovascular fitness can be maintained for at least 6 months. This is some interesting research. It's pretty cool. For at least 6 months or more with as little as 2 times a week of moderate or higher cardiovascular exercise. That's crazy, right? And usually my moderates are the high end of moderate. high end of moderate. We're talking about that at least 60% probably VO2 max and up, okay, minimally, probably. That being said, that's the research study showed. 60, 70% and above, maybe even 70, 80% and above. 2 times a week for 20, 60 minutes. And strength parameters, one time a week, meaning you'd have to work all your basic joint actions in one single session, or you have to split it up in a couple sessions, but you got to get something in a given week. You can maintain your current force production capabilities and your work capacity, your basic endurance for several months. That's phenomenal. Okay, that's what we refer to as maintenance. Although I never did like maintenance, because at some point maintenance becomes decline. Maintenance doesn't work. It doesn't work. It works for the short term and you have no choice. When you're stuck with like COVID, something like this, I get annoyed when I start reading the stuff about people showing people these high intensity workouts when people are stuck at home. There's a good probability that most people out there have higher stress right now than they've had in a long time. They're confined with their familial space into one small area. They don't have the same social ability to be able to open themselves up to things going on with them, what's happening to them, so they have more emotional stress, possibly more spiritual stress. There's a tremendous growth of all sorts of stress, and we're going to add high intensity exercise on top of that? Really? Why? Why don't we be more concerned about right now with wellness? Are you perfectly well? Your heart rate's fantastic, your RP is low relative to most levels of effort, your force output's fantastic, then we can talk about adding in intensity. But we don't need high intensity exercise unless someone's really, really ready for it, right? Especially true in difficult times. We need to identify risks, starting with those coronary heart disease or coronary artery disease risks of someone being sedentary, their blood pressure, their blood glucose levels, their previous incidents of someone in their family having a heart attack, do they smoke, their cholesterol, right? There's a numerous factors that are playing a major role with understanding someone's readiness for exercise, let alone the medications they take. And I'm not going to go into chapter 11. It's interesting stuff. And if you're going to be, by the way, looking to be a doctor or a dietitian, someone dealing with people frequently, whatever fashion of or direction of career you're looking to take, whereby you expect there's a reasonable possibility of having a fair number of people who are taking a large variety of drugs and basically pharmaceuticals for helping, little nutraceuticals for things like more supplements people take, but pharmaceutical drugs for dealing with disease and illness and problems, then you need that chapter is a good chapter. I'm just not going to get to it. It's just too much information. And of course, you're not going to be tested on it either. But I'm going to reserve that for your own research, which I highly recommend. But we need to have regular medical checkups. We said it before, if you're 39 years of age or younger, it's every 5 years at the minimum to go see a doctor for a full medical checkup. You're 40 to 49, it's every 3 years. If you're 50 and up, it's at least every other year, every 1 to 2 years, to go back and get a full physical checkup. And of course, we should be doing with exercise regular check-ins for differences in nervous system and endocrine system changes. Could be as little as 4 weeks, but definitely within 8 to 12 weeks. So somewhere in that time frame. If you're really looking at minute changes, then you do it every 4 weeks. That's probably your optimal time frame for assessing changes in someone's overall performance and then understanding what relates to that performance. You want to see after someone's been training for a long period of time, not worried about by specific minute moments of seeing changes, then maybe 8 to 12 weeks. Anything more than about 12 weeks, there's a great risk of you not paying enough attention to enough parameters of performance change that you lose benefit. That's the whole point of assessing, of evaluating. Giving you a test in a class is to see what you know and to adjust accordingly as much as possible for the class that you're in right now, and then for future classes. And you have more people that each teacher should get better at their tests. We should all get better at how we teach. You as a student should be getting better as a student every year, every class, right? We're all supposed to be progressing, getting better at everything we do. It's not just true of exercise. My question is, when it comes with exercise reduction of disease and near mortality, how can exercise not reduce disease and near mortality when it can cardiovascularly increase your left ventricular size, wall thickness, increase elasticity of the myocardium, increase your stroke volume, increase the blood vessel dilation capacity, reduce peripheral resistance, improved gastrointestinal function, increased insulin sensitivity, increased HDL, reduced LDL, reduced triglycerides, reduced blood pressure, increase the heme or red blood cell content and number, increase resting metabolic rate, downregulate SNS, sympathetic nervous system activity. Keep going. There's more. Right? Why would we not do it? It's amazing to me. But that said, it's an easier thing that's easier said than done because we focus on this stuff. The large majority of people are caught up in their lives and the things they do. This They didn't even understand what you mean. Less peripheral resistance. Okay. They didn't understand what that means. So I wouldn't try to talk to them technically, but I'd prepare with good data for preparation to help someone understand how important this stuff is. Because I bet there's someone in your life right now that needs to know that. Okay? Not just for performance purposes or long-term things that we may meet people down the road. Probably people in your life right now, right? That being said, strength. Now we can get the same benefits we can get from cardiovascular we can get from strength. There's some variation in how much we can get. When we talk about strength, for the most part, most people refer to it as anaerobic, even though technically strength relates to any level, aerobic or anaerobic. And generally speaking, when people say cardiovascular, they're talking about aerobic, although again, it could be anaerobic as it relates to cardiovascular benefit as well. So that's fair if you want to break it down that way too. And that's kind of what we're doing a little bit of here and there, but there's some crossover in all these benefits for both, right? Increased number of increased size, of muscle fibers, increased number up to the point of maturity through adolescence, and basically increased myelination, right? Get that neural pathway to travel more efficiently. The reason why most people who have trained at really young ages and had high genetic capacity or capability have so much greater levels of coordination. The reason I can still go out on the basketball court and shoot really, really well if you give me a few minutes. I can't jump as high. I don't move as fast. I still move pretty darn well, I think, for a 49-year-old. But no, I can't keep up with somebody who was like me 25 years ago. They'll kill me, right? With that said, I can still really shoot. Okay, I can still really shoot because I've honed that pattern. I don't even know how many times. If I would have just done that with golf and tennis more, then I'd be a better. I'm a pretty good tennis player, decent. I'm really in between. You watch me one hole in golf, good. The next hole, oh my! Do you know how to play golf? You ever played this game before? That's pretty much what you'll see. But I have not. Point being, I have not myelinated properly, so to speak, for those activities. I've had that neural pathway of all the different fibers firing at the right time, in the right sequence, the right fibers, I should say first, at the right time, in the right sequence. As a whole, that's a lot going on there, right? There's a reason why Tiger Woods is the only person who's been as dominant as he ever was in the world of golf decades ago. It's still the most amazing thing I've ever seen for a span of dominance for a single athlete in a single sport. And then you could probably argue there's other sports, similar athletes are doing similar things. But for the game of golf and what it is, for someone to be as dominant as he was, no one's ever done that before. No one probably ever will again. He actually raised the bar because whenever someone does something really well, other people try to emulate the best they can. It starts growing and basically snowballing in a positive way where competition gets higher, right? That's the good and bad too. That being said, though, incredible dominance, and predominantly because of both his genetic capacity, almost that's certainly a part of it, not to mention just the way he trains, but just that myelination, that over and over and over on top of genetic predisposition toward such abilities, and of course the way he trains on top of that. But really, the mere fact that he has not been able to maintain that is a reminder of one, he's aging, two, he doesn't have the same focus he once had. He doesn't have the same mental focus, but the ability with skill is always at least there, possibly to some extent. You don't lose it a lot, but power and that kind of thing certainly does go down over time. That being said, not to mention bone density increase. Remember, compressive forces are the most important thing for bone density increase. People say weight bearing, and that's very broad. It doesn't quite make sense of it. It's a complete compressive forces, bone compressing, pressing type activities, right? Walking, running, jumping, overhead pressing, that kind of thing. And of course, those things are thereby going to reduce many forms of chronic inflammation, increasing strength capacity of the neuroendocrine system, hormonal balance, so the insulin sensitivity, right, and the overall increased bodily capacity to handle and deal with stress. How could we not be looking at that as a possible way of dealing with life stress as a whole? We have controllable factors, we have uncontrollable factors. We have our uncontrollables like how old we are, our heredity and our background, and some things that go on in our lives we can't do anything about. Right? Then we have our controllable factors. Exercise is a controllable factor, a tremendously controllable factor. And that's why it's so vital we take advantage of it. Our lifestyle stress, sometimes we have some control, sometimes we don't. No question, changing our behaviors will help, but there's difficulty with that. And nutrition as well, we can control to some extent. But those are our big four. We have to look the best we can to control all four. Exercise can have the greatest short and long-term effect, unquestionably, on all the others. 3.57, 10.5. Those are numbers we don't hear anymore. They came out in a 2005 National Institute of Health study, more of a meta-analysis of information. that 3.5 hours of exercise per week was expectation of moderate or higher to be maintain health. Over tens of thousands of people they had looked at for decades. It was some of the best information I've ever seen, and it kind of fell off, and I haven't been able to find it anymore. I think that it was too heavy for people. They had to come up with something lighter, and then they came up with the 150/75 or the 300/75. I like this better. It implies that 30 minutes a day is a minimum everybody should do. 30 minutes times 7 is 3.5, right? 7 hours plus if you think you want to be fit. You want to actually have lower body fat and actually want to be able to do some things physically and actually start to look the part more. An average of an hour a day or more. Like the Play 60 for children, adults should be having Play 60, unquestionably. It's hard to fit it in, unquestionably, and you have to ask every single person you ever talk to, how important is it to you? How important is your welfare and health right now versus other things you're working on? We have to adjust accordingly. If you can only get 2 minutes of exercise in, we talked about that before, that there are studies showing that 2 minutes of cardiovascular exercise can actually decrease your chance of having a heart attack by 50% over the next 24 hours. That's not going to sustain you for life. That's just for now. Get through your current stress of today. And 10.5 hours was the minimum expectation, or average minimum, so we should say, for people expecting athletic performance gain, 90 plus minutes per day, right? Not shocking. When you're engaged in a high-level athletics or a high-level sport, you're putting in a lot more hours than that. But we're just talking about the conditioning aspect, mind you, just the conditioning aspect. Okay. And the crazy sounding stuff, the fitter or fit VP, a slight variation of what I've always used with all the information more in the personal training field and American College of Sports Medicine, National Strength and Conditioning Association. There's some variations what you see in the way they refer to it. I wanted to talk about both, so we actually had them both. We talked about a previous unit. If we're talking about for recovery, for health, for fitness or performance, the book tries to clarify the difference between someone being active versus having exercise versus performance, and that's fair. It's all exercise. It's all related to where you are. It's all related to understanding where a person begins from and goes from there. We don't have to talk about it like it's a different thing. It's the same thing, but it's not the same thing for everybody. Okay. The end goals or the hopes are the same, while the starting point for the person, my end goal, my hopes are what they are, right? But the starting point is going to vary. Okay. Where I am is very, very important, not just where I want to go, right? Frequency is a minimum of 3 days expectation. If someone only gets one in, it's okay. Life happens. I have family members right now that have got in 0 in the last several weeks, and it's driving me freaking nuts because I want them to exercise. There's only so much you can do controlling other people, but definitely got to start with you. 3 days or more of exercise minimally. 5 to 7 preferred. 7's preferred. Doesn't have to be intense every time. We talked about that before, right? We talked about the high intensity stuff every 1 to 2 days, and more moderate intensity could be every 2 or 3 days, and the light stuff could be every day, potentially. Okay. Intensity is measured as heart rate, RPE, or force output. Time under tension, 20 minutes minimum expected per session, with 60 plus minutes ideal total volume. Go to like an hour and a half if you want to be athletic, right? Per set, 1 to 10 seconds for the maximal strength, speed, power, agility, the ATP, CP type stuff. High intensity interval training, kind of the beginnings of ends of creatine phosphate, I should say, energy system wise, moving toward the end of glycolysis and kind of on the fringes of aerobic oxidation or oxidative phosphorylation. That's why HIIT is where it is. It's glycolytic, okay, mostly. But 40 to 75 seconds, still glycolytic, but a little bit longer than the early phase of creatine phosphate or the late phase of creatine phosphate, for more focus on getting size, type 2A muscle fibers in particular. 2 to 3 minutes plus strength endurance, cardiovascular conditioning. Type of tool, walk to start, run ideal if we can get there. If we can't get there, we can't get there, but that's the ideal. Strength tools are highly variable. We talked about those before. Rest, 3 to 5 minutes for getting 95 to 100% ATP coming back. Maybe that said, 90% at least after 3 minutes rest. And then 30 to 90 seconds for glycolytic. Almost everybody can get back pretty close to 60, 70% ATP in 30 seconds. So if we're engaging in aerobic type stuff, 30 seconds shouldn't be a problem. If they can't get enough rest in 30 seconds, it's not aerobic. And that's where you have 0 to 30 seconds for oxidative phosphorylation for sub 65% force output. Rate of progression, 1 to 10% daily and weekly. Start with 1%, progress a little bit if they can do more on one day into the next. Percent intensity heart rate versus percent VO2 max. Heart rate's always higher when we talk about VO2 max relative to VO2 max. That being said, we're talking about 40-60% VO2 max is 40-60% heart rate reserve, 65-75% max heart rate. 60-80% VO2 max is closer to 65 to 85% max heart rate, 60 to 80% heart rate reserve. And then 80 to 10% VO2 max is more like 85 to 100% max heart rate, and heart rate reserve is always the same as VO2 max. These are not exact numbers, but they're pretty good general ideas here. Remember, we set ceilings, we don't set floors for heart rate. This little calculator, you can click on that, or you can copy and paste it or whatever, and you can actually do a calculation for yourself. Max heart rate formulas: Carvona is heart rate reserve, 220 minus your age minus heart rate times percent intensity desired, not a must, we must meet it, minus resting heart rate equals heart rate reserve in beats per minute. That's 60 to 80% recommended, generally speaking. 20-year-old then with a 50 resting heart rate at about 70% intensity, we'd be 155 beats a minute. We'd be saying don't go above 155, not get to 155. I know I've related this story before with me being a heavier guy, running well one day and the next day being horrible, but I was higher heart rate the second day, the lower speed. It's ridiculous to shoot for a heart rate. Never do that, okay? Ever. That said, typical for 19 to 39-year-olds is 220 minus your age times the percent intensity equals training heart rate. That assumes higher resting heart rate, though. That's why the number is more conservative and lower at 135 beats a minute. If I were you, I'd be looking at more conservative type formulas when someone's untrained, more aggressive type Carvona type formulas the more trained they are. I like the heart rate reserve and Carvona formula when someone's a reasonable level of health and or fitness. Typical for 19 and over or 14 years and older, Tanaka formula is 207 minus 0.7 times your age times the percent intensity equals your training heart rate. That would give you a 40-year-old at about 70% intensity at 126 beats a minute. Okay, then you got the Gulati formula. That's more for men, by the way, too. The Tanaka formula. Gulati is 206 minus 0.9 times age, one of the more accurate formulas because women tend to have lower heart rates at similar performances, or higher heart rates, at similar performances. Get the training heart rate. The 20-year-old female at 70% intensity is going to have a higher heart rate. You're looking at that basically 20 times 0.9 is 18. Take away 18 from 206. You're essentially looking at 188. And then 188 times the training intensity. Sorry, that got omitted there. You're going to have a higher heart rate. Okay, I do the calculations. You have to do it for me. My apologies there. Last points. Goal-based performance in the short and the long term is always the goal. We got to research. Then we have to assess individuals, not just groups, form a training plan, implement that plan, observe, record data and findings, and evaluate and adjust daily on the overall plan. Simple and yet complex at the same time. Final thoughts. Thank you for you. I can only be as good a teacher or professor as you are a student. I've appreciated your efforts. Fantastic efforts from you, both when we were in class and well, we've been out with our videos and doing things from home. If I could duplicate all of your efforts for other students, I would do it. I appreciate your time, appreciate your efforts. Please let me know how I can help you. Please be well, take care of yourselves, take care of those people you have the ability to help with what you've learned, and make that an ongoing process. Best of everything to you. Thank you again.